Boys out in front. Starr begins the count. Takes the snap. He's got the quarterback sneaking. He's the Green Bay Packers are going to be world champions.
All right, what's up, guys? Welcome into Packers Total Access. My name is Clayton. You can check us out on packernet.com. You can find me on Twitter at Packers_access. If you'd like to email the show, you can send a message to PackersTotalAccess@gmail.com. We've got a special guest on the pod tonight. This is going to be a real treat. I've got to chat with Tony offline and getting to know him. And, man, I tell you, for someone who was just such a mauler on the football field, this is a guy that I think you guys are going to come to find out real quick. Is just I don't know, man. It's just like we instantly connected, Tony. You've got that in you, man. And I know you're doing some public speaking and things like that off on the side, and it shows. But we've got Tony Mandarich, the former number 2 overall pick in the 1989 draft. Golly, you were 1988 All-American in college football. Recruited by the great Nick Saban, which is kind of cool because I just learned that your parents were Croatian immigrants and Nick was Croatian. Is that right?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was.
And that was an instant connection, was it not?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It was. And he had, I'm from Canada, so he had, when he was recruiting me to Michigan State, he had come to Canada, I would say 3 times, visited with me and my parents. So it was, that was like early 1980s, 83, 84. So, and recruiting has just got more and more competitive and intense. So, but yeah, it's like the coaches are, man, they put in some hours.
Yeah. And I've kind of followed along with Nick Saban. I'm a closet. I'm down here in the middle of the SEC, right? But I'm kind of a closet Nick Saban fan. There was a time where I like to root against Bama, but now I'm to the point where I'm like, I kind of want Nick to win a few more. He seems like a really good guy.
He's legit. I mean, there's, so he recruited me and I know Nick very well. I know his wife, Terry, well. And there was even a time in college where me and my girlfriend at the time babysat for him. Right. So it's like, it was like if the guy that recruits you usually will look out for you, even if he's not your position coach, because he was a DB coach at Michigan State.
That's
on
right,
the offensive line. So even though he didn't coach me every day, he was always kind of like, hey, you doing all right? Make sure you're going to class. Kind of, it's like your guy, right? It's like, and that's how I think it probably still is today. But Nick was really, believe it or not, he's obviously different 30, 40 years later.
Right.
But fundamentally, he was the same. He was the same. He was about discipline. He was about just do your job. He was about all the things that you see on TV now about him and the talks he gives and this and that. That was Nick back in the early 80s, and he just wasn't known like he is now. And obviously he's changed because, of growth, and he's got 6, 7 national championships. And if somebody would have told me, even knowing what I know about Nick, if somebody would have told me when he went to Alabama that he would be, considered one of probably at this point today the best Alabama coach ever, I would say there's no way you could say that with because of Bear Bryant.
Right.
But I don't even think it's an argument anymore.
No, it's not.
I mean, he is the best Alabama coach ever, and that is zero disrespect to Coach Bear Bryant. Right. And I still think he has 3 or 4 championships in him.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, he kind of gets dogged a little bit because he went to Miami and struggled with the Dolphins. But, a lot of people don't know he was real big on he wanted to sign Drew Brees. And it sounds like ownership was a little bit more hesitant than him to sign Brees. And, I heard a saying the other day, Tony, they said the 3 keys to being a good head coach in football is a patient wife, a loyal dog, and a good quarterback, not in that order. I'm thinking if he had Drew Brees, he's probably still coaching in the NFL,
Right. I mean, you think about Drew Brees was leaving San Diego then, I think, because they said San Diego thought Drew Brees' career was over.
Right.
And he ended up going on to play another 10, 12 years and win Super Bowls.
Playing
But
his best football, right?
right. And a Big Ten quarterback, I will mention. And but people sometimes, and it's not just fans, but I mean, it's probably going to be a little bit more specific to fans because these are the people with the strong opinions. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, whether you're a coach or whether you're a player, at that level, it's a business.
Yeah.
And Nick would have succeeded in the NFL. I'm very confident about that. There were just other opportunities that probably were more attractive. And there were probably some things about the pros that he loved. There was probably some things about the pros he didn't really, appreciate. What really made his, what really filled his void, if you will, or what really cranked his blood was coaching kids, right? And developing, guys that would come in as freshmen. By the time they get to their fourth or fifth year, they're turning into young men going into the world or going into the NFL. So if that's your calling, then he's doing it awfully well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Got Dakota in the chat. What's up? Hey, Dakota, appreciate you hanging out with us. Also got Jacob in here with us, who said, what's up, fellas? Can't wait to listen to this interview. Go Pack, go. You see
That's right.
Tony already sporting the G. He's carrying the G
That's
tonight.
right.
You got to love
That's
it.
right.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about it a little bit. It's funny. We had a order we were going to go in, and we're already off. I've already got it off the rails here, Tony. That's the way it works on this pod.
We'll just let it roll, right? That's the best way.
Speaking of Green Bay, we'll wrap back around, and I want to get all the details of just what it was like to be a Packer. But we kind of talked a little bit about the city of Green Bay and the community and the Packer fans. What was kind of your experience just with the fans there in Green Bay? What was it like being a Packer? Back in, what was it, 1989?
Yeah, 89 and 92 for me, and it's like looking back, even I left there in 92, after 92, even in the early 2000s. This was even after I played in Indianapolis for 3 years. Looking back, and I was in a bad place. And when I say I was in a bad place, I personally was in a bad place. It wasn't that Green Bay was the bad place. And my lack of appreciation for what Green Bay was and what it represented and what the people represented and what the state of Wisconsin represented, I just had such a bad, immature attitude. And little did I know, I had this, it was really like a selfish attitude, because I was like, what's in it for me? Like, what's in it? Where can I get the biggest, deals for, promotional stuff? Well, probably in the biggest markets like New York or LA or whatever the case may be. That's how I approached it. That's how I looked at it. Where now, getting old, older or wiser, as I like to say, you look back and you go, you had the opportunity to play at the mecca of an NFL team, like of the NFL. It's like, I don't care what people in Texas say about that one team. You slap a star on your helmet, you're called America's team. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pack, I've never seen in my life, this includes college football, because fans in college football are, crazy. But as far as loyalty goes, like loyalty fans, I've never ever seen fans in the NFL as loyal as Packer fans. And obviously for home games, obviously for support for the team, even when you're losing, they would get on you, as they should, when you're losing. But we would go to away games, and it didn't matter if it was West Coast or if it was down south or in the Midwest. And I swear it's like a third of the stadium was green and gold. And we'd be the road team. And, out of that third of that stadium, I'm sure some of them were traveling Packer fans that were from Wisconsin, but a lot of them were, say, native to the city that we were playing, or, close to that surrounding area, and they were loyal to the Packers, right? They were, bleeding green and gold. And so you kind of like, at first it's a surprise, but then you're kind of like expect it. And then when you leave, And then if you go play for a different team, in my case, it was Indianapolis, you don't see that. I mean, it's not even close. And that's not a diss on Indianapolis. I don't really see it there's a few other teams that have some loyalty like that, like Dallas.
Yeah.
Miami, I think, used to have it. I don't know if they have it as much anymore, but there's a few teams like that have that kind of loyalty. But even those teams don't, from what my experience has been, I don't see it like how Green Bay fans do it. I mean, they are hardcore, and they're not, you know what? They're not idiots. You know, there's some fans that are idiots. Like there's some fans that are just, there are some fans in the NFL that are just like a group of fans or that are just, let's just say they're unsafe, you know, and Packer fans are not like that. They're as loyal as can be. It's, you know, I wish I would have appreciated it more when I was there, so I could have let it sink in more. But at least I got to the point where I could look back and appreciate it and be like, man, that place is special.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very well said. I kind of told you offline my experience, and
Yeah.
I know our listeners have heard it 100 times. I'm so passionate about the team, but what I've dug into is the history of the city of Green Bay and how football got actually introduced. Was a young man by the name of, his name was Fred, who came from college playing rugby, and you know, at the time in the 1800s, these rugby players were starting to change the rules a little bit, and that ended up becoming what pro football is today, American football, I should say.
Right.
And he introduced it to the city of Green Bay. They started a town team. Then next thing you know, you got two high school teams, East and West, big rivals.
Right.
And it was just this perfect storm, you know, with you know, just one or two of those details of the story itself, maybe the story doesn't unfold the way it does. You know, it's just thin threads. And speaking of thin threads, let's kind of go back to the beginning a little bit. I know there's so many Packer fans that haven't heard your story, and you grew up in Canada, like I said. You know, your parents were Croatian immigrants, and you had a brother too that played football. Am I thinking right, at Kent State?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, he played at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, and then he was the first-round draft pick in the Canadian Football League with the Edmonton Eskimos. Played there, I think, 10 years, and then after that, 1 year with, I think, Ottawa in the Canadian League. But he was a big influence for me to play football. And he's just a great guy and relentless at work ethic and just relentless at, like, don't even think about making an excuse as far as, missing a workout or something like that. And the cool thing was, I mean, he was 5 years older, and it was like, he's my brother. He was my hero and very influential on me. And he had gotten a scholarship to Kent State. So it kind of planted that seed of, this is something I think I would like pursue. I would like to do. And we lived grew up in Southern Ontario, just outside of Toronto. So Buffalo was a 45-minute drive. Detroit was a 3-hour drive. So, back in the day, back in the late 70s or mid 70s, late 70s, you're getting those three main networks. So I'm always watching the Bills or the Lions, right? Or the Eagles, Philly in the afternoon. And so you're limited, but the stuff you do see, I'm sitting there glued to the TV, and literally at 11 years old, I made a decision that I was like, this is what I want to do for a living. I mean, it was like one of those, when I grow up, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. And
I remember writing it down on a piece of paper, and, luckily, there had to be some luck, but a lot of work too. And it worked out.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. And if I understood correctly, it was, did your brother, if I heard the story right, your brother convinced your parents to let you go to high school in the States? Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We talked about it because, these days, U.S. colleges do recruit in Canada, especially in that area where I grew up, because it's the most of the population's in that area. And but back in that day, they didn't come to Canadian or U.S. colleges, or at least the big ones didn't come to Canada to recruit, because it was Canadian football, high school football especially, is like almost like, I don't want to say non-existent. I mean, it's there, but compared to U.S. high school football, it's like a whole different ball game. And so he convinced my parents and to move down with him and to live with him when he was a senior at Kent State. And I would go to the local high school, Kent Roosevelt High School, and hopefully when scouts would come to the football games at Kent Roosevelt, the college scouts, that, you know, I would get noticed and hopefully get a scholarship. That was really like the plan, right?
Yeah.
What worked out luckily for us was Kent Roosevelt had 5 players that were like tier 1 recruits. And so obviously there's going to be tons of scouts coming. So that obviously helped me out. And Ohio was one of Coach Saban's areas for recruiting. And Coach Saban went to Kent State, and one of Coach Saban's very good friends was Coach John Nemec, who was my head coach at Kent Roosevelt High School. So it's like interesting how the whole dynamic tied in. So John Nemec, my high school head coach, had said to Nick, you know, look, we've got these other guys. He's like, which obviously you should check out, but he's like, there's this kid that came down from Canada, and I think he's got some ability, and you should, you know, if you're interested, this is his number, and watch him play. And, you know, one thing led to another, and talked to Nick and took a visit to, you know, East Lansing, and I took a visit to a few other places, but once I went to East Lansing, I knew that was the place.
Yeah. Those school visits really matter, don't they? In college
they do.
football? Yeah.
They do. And they do. And they've changed a ton since, you know, when I was going, like when my visit, you know, it's like, yeah, they wine you and they dine you and they want you to have fun and a good time and all that. But now it's still a lot of that, but there's a lot of things that have changed that I've, you know, just heard firsthand from people about, you know, now, you know, high school recruits that are, doesn't matter if they're super high end or like top tier recruits or not. It's like, they're asking questions like, how many different uniforms are we wearing this year? And I'm like thinking to myself, what do you mean? Like, how many different? I mean, it's like we wore, you know, our dark uniforms at home and our white uniforms or lighter colored uniforms on the road. And that's just how it was, you know, for ever since I could remember. That's how it was in the NFL ever since I could remember. So when, you know, I think when Nike and Oregon, you know, got their thing going, and every game they had different uniforms, different helmets, different chrome this, chrome that, and shiny this and shiny that. Yeah, you know, I think it was cool, but you know, there's a part of me that says, do I want a kid playing for me? If I'm a coach at a college, do I want a kid playing for me where their most important priority is how many different uniforms do we have this year? So that is, you know, that's like a huge change that, you know, now granted, I mean, you got to roll with the changes, but you have that. And then you have this whole portal thing, you know, with recruiting that is changing a lot of things.
Yeah. NIL is the Wild West. I am watching it so close. Like, my goodness, how is this going to play out? You know, there's going to be agencies involved, and agents will always find a way to get their hands on some of that. Right. I mean,
they will.
Yeah.
I in the big scheme of things, you know, look, I want the kids to make money. Yeah, I do. But I think it's going to implode. I think it's going to implode within 2 or 3 years. Like, there's going to be so many negative things that were not foreseen coming as far as distractions that they're going to either really put, you know, boundaries and rules on it, like, and they have them now already, but even like just make it real strict. But if you don't have a consequence, you could play at 5 different colleges in 5 years, right? When I went to college, if you transferred, I mean, you better make sure you're making the right choice, because you got to sit a year. So here, there's no consequence for that. Right. It's like, if you don't like what, you know, because you're not starting and you think you should be starting, and that's why you're leaving, you know, what does that say about you, about as far as a player or a young man, on how to handle adversity?
Yeah.
You
Right.
know,
And these are
so
all things that scouts are looking for, and that's the big. I don't know. That's the big thing that I'm learning as I get deeper into this
mhm,
fandom of not just the Packers but the NFL in general is just the background checks alone and trying to dig in a little bit deeper and going, is this someone who loves the game of football? Is this someone who's going to
right.
dedicate themselves? And I know at Michigan State, if I remember the story correctly, Nick was trying to kind of explain to you, here's what the daily grind is going to look like, and you basically told him, well, I'm going to do twice as much, right? That's
More or less, yeah. That more or less that was the conversation. Or he was basically saying, there's going to be a lot of demand. We have very high standards, and we're going to hold everybody, including you, to high standards of expecting you to do this, 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 and this, as they should. They're
yeah.
investing money into you as a scholarship. And I was like, yeah. And I said, I'll do the workouts, but I'm also going to do my own workouts in addition to, like, my weightlifting workouts. And he looked at me like just puzzled. He looked at me puzzled, like I don't know if this kid understands how tired he's going to be when we get done with him, right? And to his point, he was right. But internally, I had that thing that I wanted to be the best college football player in the country at my position. And if that's what you're going to say, and if that's what your drive is, well, you can't train like everybody else. You have to do more. And that applies in sport, business, doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
If you want to be the best dog groomer, you have to groom more dogs, or whatever it is. You have to put the time in. You have to rinse and repeat, refine, and keep going. So I was like, if I want to be an extraordinary player, I need to put in extraordinary work above and beyond what's asked of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, business and everything else in life, if you want to live like no one else, you've got to live like no one else, right? You've
Right,
got
right.
I mean, above the line, all those
You
quote
can't live
unquote
9 to
cliches.
5. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't live 9 to 5 if you want the extra.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with 9 to 5.
Right.
That's just it. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't criticize somebody that wants to work
Right.
14 hours a day either.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. If you, I'm trying to be nice here, but I mean, the way I look at it, we grew up a little bit rough. I was born in a house in projects, and I watched my mom scrap her ass
Right,
off her entire
right.
life to give her family what it needed. And when I look up and go, hold up, you're gonna hold it against me because I'm wanting to work harder? No, I ain't.
Right,
Get them out of my life, right? Get them out
right.
of my life. It's the only way you can
Agreed.
handle it.
Agreed.
So let's get into, I guess, kind of the tough part. You're at Michigan State, and I hope this isn't inappropriate, but
Nothing's inappropriate. If it's inappropriate, I'll say, look, it's inappropriate.
this is the thing, that the way I always looked at the game of football, and I grew up in the 90s, right? My earliest memories were the late 80s, and I don't want to sit here and pretend like, oh, I knew who the players were and this and that. Just as a young boy, it's like, man, I've fallen in love with this game of football. There was a movie that came out, and this is kind of off cuff. I didn't tell you we were going to talk about this, but this just came to mind. One of my favorite movies is called The Program. It's a college football movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I remember when it came out, there were so many people going, oh, that's not how it really is. That's not, what's the college game's about. And they're just trying to downplay it and, dog it and this and that. And lo and behold, all these years later, we look up and go, that's how everything was going on. There were boosters paying players. Now it's legal to pay them, right?
Right.
There were boosters paying players. We all know about steroids. To me, I don't know all the history of steroids, but the 70s seemed like the era when it really, boom, it kind of came onto the scene. So you had, all these college players are looking for that advantage, and it's one of those things too, just like any addiction. I think, Tony, that you get addicted to succeeding too. It's like,
Absolutely.
I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure I'm the best.
Absolutely.
And some people like to virtue signal and stand on their ivory tower and say, I did it the right way and this and that. And
Right.
there's a lot of people that said that,
Right.
until they had to come clean. And
Right.
I just don't look at people during that era and go, that's a bad person. I go, that was someone who was willing to do whatever it took. People pretend like the work still didn't have to be
Right.
done, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it's
Right.
like you had all these players that were trying the same thing to try to gain that advantage, but only a handful of them really came out the other side and were willing to put in the work, right? So
Right.
when it comes to college football and as you got ready for the NFL draft, and I was reading you ran a 4.6 40 at
Correct.
6'6". And how many pounds, Tony?
That day I was 308.
308 running a 4.6. My gosh. Yeah. So, you're kind of getting ready to go into the NFL, whether it was your junior, senior year, or whatever, as you're kind of winding down the college career. What was the moment where it's like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to gain that advantage, and kind of, how did that come about, I guess is the best way to ask it.
Well, so it would be, you're always, well, I shouldn't say if you're in that mindset, you're always looking for the advantage. And that doesn't mean, I mean, that includes legal advantages. That includes, and I was talking with a buddy of mine earlier about, the 40 time and the fast 40. Well, that didn't happen. A lot of people say, well, it was the steroids. And it's like, okay, well, that was maybe a spoke in the wheel of 20 spokes that made the complete player. Nobody really talks about the fact that I worked with the track coach at Michigan State for 2 full years. And for the sole purpose of sprinting a 40, a fast 40, because the way you sprint a 40 is not how you block as an offensive lineman. As an offensive lineman, you want a wide base and you want to chop your feet, and you don't want to, you never want to cross your feet over because you lose leverage and the guy can just toss you, like Reggie White did me, and and he did it to many people.
Absolutely.
But I got a strength. I mean, I spent time with our track coach at Michigan State, and I had him teach me I said, this is 2 years before the combine. So I have 2 full seasons of football left. And I went to that coach knowing that I'm working on this for something that's going to happen 2 years from now, because I know that that's a valuable thing, that if you do well at this, it's going to help with the shuttle, doing a running shuttle, and you're making a business investment in yourself, right? So I learned the best techniques that I could learn on how to sprint, coming out of the blocks. Even though we couldn't use blocks when we were doing the 40, it's like the best way to sprint if you don't have blocks, but come out, and how to use your hands, how to use your legs, how to use your hips, how to finish through the finish line at the 40. So I spent 2 off seasons learning all that and practicing it. So part of it is I mean, you have to have some gift of speed and or athletic ability, but that has to be also worked on to really refine it. So if everybody could just take a shot of something, a steroid or some magic drug that makes you fast, everybody'd be running fast 40s at 308, right? If steroids, and let me just preface by saying I condone the use of steroids. Do not use steroids. Okay. Right. But it's like if steroids, if you took steroids and they just worked, like you got big shoulders and you got strong and you could bench 500-600 pounds and you could squat 700-800 pounds and do all this, well then why isn't everybody doing it? Like what? Like it's like everybody would be doing it. And then the other factor is there was guys stronger than me that just didn't have the ability to be able to put it all together. You got to be able to, wasn't fast enough because they were so big, wasn't quick enough because they were too big and too strong. Then there were some that were big enough, strong enough, fast enough, quick enough, but couldn't think on the run. And that didn't mean that they were stupid. It's just that game is a different animal. And so you've got it's like a football player is a football player.
Yeah.
He's not a tennis player, and I'm sure tennis has so many nuances that I know nothing about, even though I know the fundamentals of tennis, that those guys at the top train all the time on certain things that are little things, but that are the difference between good and great.
Yeah.
So, I trained 2 years for that 40. And, I ran a fast 40 and I had stopped steroids 16 weeks before that. And that was because I was like, the rumors out, and it's a very badly kept secret, obviously. And so I was like, I'm done with it, because now, and I'm kind of making a business decision. Now I risk losing if I test positive for steroids.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm done with them. And so, okay, so 16 weeks later, I run my 40. And to me, I really don't care if people even now say, well, it was because of steroids or whatever. It doesn't matter. I know what the truth is.
Right.
And I don't even think they hold my time in the NFL combine record, because even though it's still to date, nobody's run faster at offensive line. There's been some that have come close. There's been one guy that was like 360, ran a 4.7, which is incredible. If you think about it, right? I mean, that's like smoking. But they don't recognize it in the official books because it wasn't run in Indianapolis, where the combine is. It was run at Michigan State. But you had over 30 to 40 scouts and coaches there timing it.
Yeah.
So, and they were all getting pretty much the same times. And it's like, so that kind of like makes me go, well, why are you not counting it? It's like, it's like, I don't lose sleep over it, but I'm like, let's just spit the truth out. If you think that it's not legitimate because I took steroids, then say that.
Right.
But it's something personally I'm proud of, because of all the other work also that went into running that. And that's, we just spent 5 minutes talking about that. And that's one spoke in the wheel.
Right.
That's not even working out like with weights. And that's not even doing offensive line drills. Yeah. It's like all these other things. And then you've got, school. You got to go to school. Right. And, and I don't want to say you got to stay out of trouble. I mean, by default, that's expected. But how many great players do we know that blow it because they get in trouble?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like with the law or whatever. I mean, I blew it for myself. I self-sabotaged myself over those 4 years, right? With the abuse of opioids and alcohol at Green Bay. So it's like mine was like a slow self-sabotage. But when you see people get drafted and you see the projection that they were supposed to be in the top 10 picks, and all of a sudden they've dropped down to the third round, it's usually not because of the film. It's usually something that they've done background checks on, that they found out about, or he tested dirty for something, and it probably wasn't a steroid. It was probably a street drug or something, because now, like, steroids in the NFL now, I would say are almost non-existent. Yeah. Because the testing is so rigid, and it was getting rigid when I entered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you were kind of talking about, steroids doesn't just magically make you, a better football player. I think it might give you a little extra of what you need to become that player. I remember when Barry Bonds, that kind of burst onto the scene, and we know how our baseball purists love their stats and love their record books and everything. But, right. I'm personally not a big Barry Bonds fan. Nothing personal. I've just not been like, hey, man, I love Barry Bonds. But I remember when he started catching the heat and he started going after the records. But again, that competitiveness comes out, because you look up and go, hold up a minute. Sammy, I just had to sit here, and this is me being Barry Bonds for a minute. I had to sit here and watch Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire get all of this recognition and break the single season home run record. And I'm sitting over here playing clean, and I'm not even getting noticed. it didn't make Barry Bonds a Hall of Fame baseball player. What it gave
Right.
Barry Bonds is just a little bit more bat speed, which meant a little more time to look at that ball.
Yep.
And that was the edge. And in my opinion, that's the even playing field is,
Right.
okay, now let's see who's a better hitter. Is it Mark
Right.
McGwire or is it Barry Bonds? Because they're both
Right.
on an even playing field.
Right. And Barry
So-
Bonds, I'm not a huge baseball fan, although I did follow that whole era, like that part that you're talking about, because of the home run records were being broken. Barry Bonds was probably going to go to the Hall of Fame, even if he never broke a record, like a home run record, because he was already like a tier 1 all-star.
Yeah.
Before he, started really, like, because when you see that big jump in 1 year, it becomes more obvious, right?
Right.
So, but Barry Bonds, and again, I'm not a baseball fan, never met Barry Bonds, don't know Barry Bonds, but he was a great player long before he took steroids. And like you said, he was very competitive and kind of was like, look, if they're doing it, I'm going to do it. This is me assuming this. But you also kind of got to have good hand-eye coordination. I mean, there's a lot more to baseball than just, if everybody could take, or if someone who's a baseball player with aspirations to play in the majors takes steroids, it just doesn't happen. You just don't get to the majors and become great. It's like there's so much work to it.
That's a fact. That is a fact. Let's do this. Let's shift gears.
Yep.
So coming out of Michigan State, we talked about the combine, talked about the preparation, all that, and then you get drafted by the Green Bay Packers. Just start at the beginning, Tony. Like, where were you at when you got the phone call? Were you I don't even know if they invited players to the draft at the time or not. I'm not sure exactly how, because at the time it was at Radio City Music Hall, I believe.
No, in New York.
Yeah.
I believe it was in New York. It was there or Madison Square Garden. I think it was at Radio City.
I think they did rotate.
Yeah. And so 2 weeks prior to the draft, Dallas had come out to the media and said, we are on draft day, we are going to draft Troy Aikman. So we're already starting to negotiate a contract with them. And Green Bay came out and said, if Dallas holds true to their word, then we're going to draft Tony as the second pick. So, and there was really no reason for Dallas to be playing games as far as draft day games, because they needed a quarterback badly.
Right.
And so my draft day experience was actually it was very unique. It was very cool. It was very cool what Green Bay did. They flew me in to be at Lambeau. Because that's where they had, the whole coaching thing, the office, the draft war room, all that was in the stadium in where the coaches' offices are. So, we always see the video of wherever the draft is being held, each team has their table with their little logo, and there's one or two people there that take a phone call on who to, say to the guy to send the letter up to the commissioner to say, this is who we're drafting. So when Dallas drafted Troy, I was, in Green Bay and, with all the coaches there. And I remember Coach Infante and Tom Bratz saying, okay, we're going to dial this number, which is going to be on the floor of the draft room at Massey or Radio City Music Hall or whatever it was. He goes, but we want you to make the call.
No. That is all.
It was one of the coolest things. It was like, wow, like this is really cool. I was like, this is just really cool. It was, how many times in your life do you get an opportunity to do something like that?
Yeah.
And I was so grateful because I didn't think about it. They came up with that idea. So it was funny because the conversation, although it was very short with the gentleman that I called, who ended up knowing because he worked for the Packers. I called and they're showing it on live TV, and he answers, and I go, "Hey, it's Tony Mandarich," and so they must have let him in on it. And it's weird to say, "I want you to draft me," Right. So he's like writing my name down, and I'm sure they already had it written down or whatever, and then he gives it to the person, and the person walks it up, and And then I said, all right, thanks, and, I'll meet you when, I'm sure shortly at whatever, when you come back. And which I thought was a very unique, fun experience. That experience I'll never forget the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that was the
Yeah.
old Lambeau Field. It was just,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you see some of the pictures, and if I'm thinking correctly, I believe that front office you were talking about was actually attached at one end zone. It was like this little,
Correct.
like little office complex. It's
Correct.
amazing how times have changed. It's
Yeah.
just, you see some of the, I've actually got a picture of that specific stadium hanging up right here, and it's just,
Right.
it's like, man, it's changed so much. It's
Right.
just
Right.
amazing.
It was awesome.
So you get to your first training camp. What's there's got to be one or two stories, right, from your first training camp where you go, man, like the other day I had Mike Wall on, former offensive lineman for the Packers, and he talked about hitting Reggie, and because this is on the back nine of Reggie's career when he came in as an offensive lineman. He was like, Reggie was different. You hit him, it was like that hurt. That it's like hitting a wall. He just had that natural strength and just being one of the greatest of all time. But with your first training camp, what sticks out? Any stories you got? Anything like that?
Yeah, the biggest story is my holdout. I didn't go to training camp, right? So I held out because of negotiations, and I signed. I believe it was, if I remember correctly, September 5th is when we reached an agreement, and I signed. And so camp was over. So I signed, I think, on maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday, and the kick opener was on Sunday, 3 days later.
Wow.
Yeah. So they had a special thing, which I'm sure they have now. They gave me a 2-week or player exemption, so I wouldn't count against the 53-man roster, but I could be there and I could start learning the offense and I could start practicing, but knowing for the first 2 weeks I cannot step foot on the field to play a game or in the game, because you got to cram this whole new offense and this whole new system into your mind. And not only that, you've got all these players now everybody's good. It's not like, oh, good, we're playing this team who's very bad and they have very average players. Even the bad teams have great players now in the NFL. So my first experience was, I didn't go through camp, and, got a lot of flack for it, as, I guess I should have. But again, it was a business decision.
Right.
Right. And right or wrong or indifferent, that was something that did hurt my adjustment, and that's, again, I own that. It's of my own doing. And when you miss 6 weeks of camp, especially as a rookie, you're missing a ton. You are missing a ton. Even if you're like, well, I don't want to get hurt, it's like, that's okay. Just go to camp, be in shorts and a jersey, watch the plays, learn the plays, go in all the meetings, go into the offices, learn everything except don't hit anybody, because if that's what you're worried about as an unsigned player. So, because that would put you light years ahead of where I was, but I was so arrogant, and I was the boss of, I thought I was the boss, right? I know the best way to do this, and we'll do it my way. And it's like, look, my way almost got me killed.
Yeah. Yeah. God, so that's amazing. So you begin your career in Green Bay, right? You're playing. I mean, you got thrown right into the fire. I mean, you're trying to learn the system and everything, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. At this point, you had stopped using the steroids already. At this point, correct? So you're this is. I'm sure it's somewhat of an adjustment, body wise.
Yeah.
But what do you think? If there's anything to be learned, I guess would be the best way to ask this. What do you think went wrong in Green Bay? What could you say is, hey, here, this is why it didn't work out. Now, I'm going to say this as a fan. I have come to understand, and head coach Mike McCarthy, who used to be with the Packers, now with the Dallas Cowboys, said when he was with the Packers, he doesn't believe there's any bad players in the league. There are good and they're great. And sometimes the difference between good and great is the perfect situation, the perfect scenario for that player. It's just such a thin thread between the worst team in the league and the best team in the league, right? Any given Sunday, all those things you hear. What would you say it was, Tony, that kind of, kind of went south in Green Bay?
Well,
first of all, I want to say this. I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend, and I know none of our listeners are going to pretend that Green Bay was a powerhouse. They were garbage in the 80s, right? I mean, it was as far as a win-loss record. So
not compared to the when Reggie got there and Brett was taken off. I mean, they were a different Packer team, but when I stepped foot in Green Bay, I was already failing, and it had nothing to do with Green Bay. It had to do with me, because I had already kind of replaced like steroid use with started to abuse opiates and started to indulge more in alcohol. So I had already was kind of self-sabotaging, and I was coming into Green Bay tripping, more or less metaphorically, not literally, but I was like tripping. And I never really gave myself a chance, or really Green Bay a chance. There was a lot of times, I've mentioned this before, not too many times that I've mentioned this, but Green Bay, the organization, the coaches, the people that, were immediately attached to it, gave me every opportunity to succeed. Wow. There were times when I look back, once my head cleared up after I got sober years later, there were times I looked back and I was like, man, this guy, this coach went out of his way to have a sit down talk with me that wasn't like a scolding talk. It was like hey, what's going on? Like, are you okay? Like a human talk.
Wow.
And so, it's like they were salt of the earth people. And then, the fan, how do you not mention the fans too? The fans were, as much as fans are fans, they were still forgiving to a degree. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, maybe if they started to indulge more in alcohol, they didn't become as forgiving, right? They'd become more like, you're a bum, you're a bust or whatever. But I was given plenty of opportunities, and there was plenty of chances plenty of instances where Green Bay went out of its way to try to help me, but they couldn't put their finger on the problem. And I knew what the problem was.
Gotcha.
It was the chemicals. And everybody, including the media, was so wrapped up into the steroid part. I was like, this is, I'm thinking to myself at that time, this is fantastic. Everybody's distracted by the steroids. I don't have to worry about testing positive for steroids because I'm not taking them. And nobody can, because they're so distracted and focused on this, nobody sees all this opiate abuse.
I didn't even think about that. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
So at that time, I'm thinking, boy, this is great. Right. But little do you know, it's like, well, the biggest loser is me. You're the one sabotaging yourself. You're the one not living up to, even the status quo of what you should be putting out for this organization and this community and these fans.
Yeah. And I don't want to, if you're uncomfortable talking about this, it's totally cool. You just say, hey, let's not touch on it. But one of the things I've heard from several players, I've got a friend too that played in the early 2000s, actually for the Patriots. He was an undrafted free agent, kind of an edge hybrid defender. Went to camp with them, went on to 2 other teams. And I've heard this from other people on podcasts and former players were like, you would walk in the locker room. And again, this isn't to dog the organization or the NFL as a whole, but this is what sticks out in my mind. They said you would walk into the locker room after a practice or in the training room, and they had 55-gallon garbage cans full of painkillers. And it was grab a handful and go. Did you witness that or no?
Never saw it.
Okay.
I wish, at the time, I would have been like grabbing the whole barrel and putting it in my locker.
Right. And we are
But
talking, those people that I heard say that was probably, 20 years difference, from when you played.
yeah,
I was just
eh,
curious with that. Like,
but
I wonder what it was like. How
and
did it
yeah,
come so easy? Obviously the pain. My goodness.
yeah, and it starts off with the correct motivation of taking a medication.
Mhm.
Medication usually medication taken correctly as prescribed will benefit you.
Mhm.
That being said, I will throw in a disclaimer that not all medication will do that, especially since the last 3 years. But
Hey, hey,
that's
hey.
my opinion. That's my opinion, and
Well,
that
I'll say this.
doesn't
I
mean
know you
I'm
say
right or
it's your
wrong.
opinion, but we share a similar opinion. I'll just leave it at that. But go ahead.
Right. And I'm not gonna, like, it's like I'm not afraid to talk about that issue. But
Yeah.
besides that, like, I never saw, it's like stuff was not just handed out freely,
Okay.
painkillers and stuff. I can say this: I manipulated many doctors and many pharmacists, um, in the state of Wisconsin and surrounding states, for narcotics.
Gotcha. And Brett said something similar. Brett Favre said the same thing. Is like he would go around doctors in the area and
Yeah.
make sure that he had everything he wanted and needed. And this
Yeah.
is something that hits home to me, Tony. I didn't tell you this offline, but my my mother actually overdosed on opioids back in 2020, not too long
Okay.
ago.
Right.
She, spent 20 years working on the highway, a black topping company,
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
have both her knees replaced. And we lived in a part of the country in Harlan County, Kentucky, which they call the Oxycontin capital of the world.
Mm.
These doctors were just, I mean, they were handing it out like candy, trying to get it into the community and everything. And
Right.
there's many documentaries on that and big pharma and all that. But
Yep.
I watched her literally go from, okay, she had to have both knees replaced. And at first it was for the pain. And then obviously you begin abusing it and it
Right.
ultimately cost her her life, and
Right.
those last, I'm not, it doesn't make me happy saying this, but those last 7 years of her life, it wasn't my mom anymore. It was, it was a different person. And
Right.
a family member, it's frustrating because you're like, how can I help? And at the same time, in the back of your mind, you're going, she was my hero. She was just the
Right.
hardest working human being I had ever,
Right. Right. Right.
been in contact with. And it's like, who am I to say I understand what she's
Right.
feeling or going through? And then
Right.
you look up and it's too late. And I hear
Right.
your story and it's like, it wasn't too late, man. You came out the other side. And I think the biggest thing too is owning it. You just got to own it. She never owned it. And
Right.
that's probably what saved your life, right? Is saying, hey, look,
Well, yeah. I mean, that the grace of God saved my life. It was when I had so many, like I said, Green Bay people, and then people in Michigan that, when I lived in Traverse City, Michigan, after Green Bay, there was so many people tried to help me, but until the pain became overwhelming, and I want to say more emotional pain than physical pain. But when that pain became so overwhelming that why am I on such a 7-8 year losing streak?
Mm-hmm.
And why are all of these relationships fractured, from family to friends to acquaintances to whatever? And you realize, if you're really going to take a cold hard look at yourself, you're the common denominator in all this stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe let's look at my role in all this stuff. And that's kind of where you at least can start before that, even that admission happens. And for me personally, being able to do that and take a look at myself, that in itself was a miracle and an act of God. Because, like I said earlier, I had all the answers. I mean, unfortunately, we have stuff on VHS tape to prove it, right? Because I had all the answers for me. I had all the answers for you. I had all the answers for the Packers. And it was everybody's fault but mine. It was my mom and dad's fault, my brother's fault, my wife's fault. my coach's fault, the Packers organization, the fans' fault, the media's fault. It's like until I said, hey, wait, maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. And until that happened, and what drove that to happen was emotional pain. And I think that was, there's a friend of mine that says, and I really like this quote. He says, God loved you enough to let you make your own mistakes.
Yeah.
And then you could realize, and then you have a choice. Do I want to continue down this path of hell, or do I want to start correcting things? And just because you remove chemicals, whatever those chemicals are, whether they're steroids or opiates or coke, or it doesn't matter what it is, just because you remove those, like, it doesn't mean you're a saint. You have to change your behavior. You have to change you. And a lot does change immediately because the chemicals are removed, but there's a lifelong process of working on yourself the rest of your life. And as I get older, or I'll say wiser, almost 57, the road narrows as I get older, and on things that I will do and things I won't do as far as moral laws, and character and stuff like that. And I don't, profess to be a saint. My biggest thing that I really keep, like, I'd like to keep things fundamental and simple. My biggest thing is, am I a better version of myself today than I was yesterday? Because if I am, I'm in the right direction. If I'm not, I need to find out why I'm not, and then I need to correct that. And I shouldn't compare myself to anybody else or any other people. And that's why when we talk, going back a little bit, talking about, the 70s and 80s decade, was steroid use was prevalent in the college and pro football. Well, that's why I won't compare to other players. What they did is their business.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to throw anybody into the bus. It's like, if they wanted to, and everybody kind of knew everybody was doing it.
Right.
Okay. So I can only own my stuff and be responsible for my stuff and be transparent about it. And, and again, try to every day be a better version of myself than I was yesterday.
Yeah. God, such a strong response, because it's like everything that everyone wants in life, everything we dream of in life, it's right there to be taken, but we have to get out of our own way. We have to kind of go, hey, look, I don't have all the answers. I don't have, if I did, I would be further along. I have to remind myself that all the time.
Right.
And what you said about, what's the common denominator here? I could not tell you how many times I find myself in a situation and I go, hold up a minute. That person ticked me off. That person ticked me off. This didn't work. And all I can think about, there was this man that lived behind us in Kentucky. His name, I just knew him as Mr. Vanover. This old man. He told me one time, and it stuck with me. I use it on the podcast all the time. He said, if everywhere you go,